one holy and living God. Amen. Let's just table that ending of the gospel for a minute. Good morning. Good morning. It is so good to see you. I saw shafts of light coming through the windows. It is good to be worshiping together as one congregation, as one church family, as we start our program year, and to follow that up with a big party outside where we all just get to hang out and be together. Is it good to be here? I'm sorry, is it good to be here? Okay, well, turn to one another and say hi, because I know not everybody knows each other. Say hi, it's good to be here. Say hello, introduce yourself. It's nice when we do things like that occasionally. I know church can be very formal and structured and rote, and you know, it's a big deal, and God forbid we ever laugh. Did you listen to that letter that Paul wrote? John Bond came up to me this morning before worship. He was like, this thing about people who are weak eat vegetables. Like, is that really what it says in the Bible? Can we change that translation? Is Paul writing against vegetarians? No, of course not. He is not. But it is in there. And why did he write it? And is that why we're serving barbecue later? No, it's not. Paul's saying it because he's saying, welcome those who are new in the faith. It's not weak and strong. It's those who are new, who are just coming to this community for the first time, and don't get hung up about what they eat. And don't get hung up quarreling over different opinions. Practicing the practice of welcome is always around food. We all know this. We throw a party. We want to host when we want to share our love and good fortune and blessings. And food says so much about who we are and where we come from. It names our culture. It often names our religion. It names what is important to our family. So Paul says, if something new is taking place at that table, open yourself to a new possibility and don't focus on the difference. Focus on the gratitude for being able to share a meal together. I sat here for a moment being filled with gratitude, knowing so many of my colleagues are in churches this morning with roofs blown off or flooded basements, wrestling with building issues, and we just get to come and be in our space and be together and give thanks. This is what Paul focuses on in every letter to every church he started. It's what you practice together as a community that matters. Not what you say, not the creedal statements, not the doxologies. It's what you do together. And it's practicing together as a community of faith that you individually find the God you are looking for. It's the practices that give us a feeling of presence and belonging and purpose. We find that in relationship with each other. You see, there's a gold leaflet in your bulletin, right? Pull it out, that insert that's in there. It's also, the first verse is on the front of your bulletin because this is a really important hymn that I want us to almost memorize and know that we are singing our prayers of who we are when we sing it. That first verse, let us build a house where love can dwell, where all can safely live. We're saints, that's you and me. We're saints, and children often tell how hearts learn to forgive. Built of hopes and dreams and visions, rock of faith and vault of grace. Here, the love of Christ ends all divisions because all are welcome. All are welcome in this place. We build that anew every single Sunday and all the days in between as we practice love and teach forgiveness in our hearts. Now back to that harsh gospel we just heard. Forgiveness seems to matter so very much to God, and it is one of the hardest practices we have, which is why probably Jesus talks about it all the time, and why I'm sure you picked up it is a prominent theme in everything we read and sing today. Starting right there in our first lesson, this story from Genesis. It is the ending of a family drama that would rival the season premiere of This Is Us. This story of brothers betraying brothers and envy and jealousy and favoritism. I think most of you know the gist. Brothers sold Joseph into slavery, told the father he was dead. Lots of horrible things happened in between. And now Joseph is in a place of prominence and authority with the king of Egypt. Joseph controls the food supply. He's in charge of the grain. His father's died, and his brothers are scared because they know if they were in his position, it's payback time. Can you picture a time in your life when you knew it was payback time? When you were terrified to own up to something, to someone you had hurt, to a wrong you had done, scared of what might happen, but knowing that it was now the rubber meets the road, and it's time to walk that walk. And you know you're at the mercy of someone else. So his brothers do something that we might do in that situation. They play on his heartstrings a little bit. They invoke the memory of their dead father. Our father's dying words, Joseph, we're telling you to forgive us. I don't think Joseph needed to hear that to collapse under the weight of his sorrow, which is what he does. He just breaks down and weeps. Do you know what it's like to be that person in the story? When someone comes and tells you that they're here, they're ready to make amends, and it's just really painful because all the hurt and anger is wrapped up and entangled with all the love of this deep relationship, and you know things are never going to be the same. It's like one of those knots in a little gold necklace, and you just can't pull it out because relationships that are meaningful are messy. But when he does pull himself together, Joseph does something that's pretty incredible and something for us to take into account. Notice he does not say, I forgive you. I hear him saying, I'm not there yet, because he answers by saying, am I in the place of God? I'm going to give that work to God for right now. I know you intended to hurt me, brothers. I know you wanted to do me harm, but don't be afraid, because I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to do the opposite, actually. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your families. I'm going to take care of your children, and you have nothing to worry about. Because despite what Joseph's lived through, or maybe because of what Joseph's lived through, he says, you know what? I just choose to see the good, and I choose to enact the good. Do you hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people? Now in the gospel, Peter asked Jesus a question that I bet you've asked God or Jesus yourself. When can I stop forgiving? Now, do you remember another time when Jesus gets asked a question by that lawyer? He stands up and he says to Jesus, who is my neighbor? Do you all remember that? Because Jesus follows it with something we all know, the Good Samaritan parable. And instead of answering that lawyer directly, who's trying to trip Jesus up, Jesus says, let me tell you a story. And he tells that story about that man on the side of the road, and the priest walks by, and the Levite walks by, and the Samaritan walks by. And while the Samaritan does nothing to us, fill it in with whichever ethnic group you hear being disparaged the most in your world, that ethnic group goes and picks up the wounded man by the side of the road, takes care of him, brings him to an inn, pays the innkeeper for him to stay and recuperate. And Jesus turns to that lawyer and says, who acted as a neighbor to that man? Jesus takes that lawyer's question and says, you're asking the wrong question. It's not about the other, it's about what you do. And this is exactly what Jesus does with Peter, because Peter wants to know when he can stop forgiving. And Jesus' insanely high number, which honestly can't even be translated, says, stop counting. Stop keeping track. Stop trying to draw a line when God never draws a line with any of us. What would be the number of times you've asked God to forgive you? I personally have no idea what that number would be. I wouldn't even want to try and count it, and I wouldn't even want to be made aware of all the times I should have asked, but I didn't. It's called amazing grace for a reason. So when Jesus follows up with this pretty intense parable, let's all have a lot of sympathy for that poor guy who doesn't do so well. His boss forgives an amount of money that would take him several lifetimes to pay back. He has been released, made free, set free from a debt that is literally insurmountable. Can you think of a time when that happened in your life? Can you think when someone did something for you that you really, you can't ever pay back? That's not how the world typically works, right? Our debts are owed, interest gets accrued financially and otherwise. The world keeps count. We are taught to keep count. It's eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. So it makes perfect sense that this guy goes out there and lapses right back into the ways of the world. He has pressures in his life. He has bills he has to pay. He probably has someone who he has to answer to at home. Yes, he's experienced amazing grace one time, but if it's going to take root in his heart and in his life, he's going to have to practice it again and again. That's what we do. We are a people who are building a house that will never be finished, where all we do is seek and find ways to practice responding to God with our lives because God responded to us with God's life. I hope you saw that our foyer is now filled with images of our people and this body. That matters. It helps us see who we are here and now. It helps people who walk through our doors see who we are and see the story of what we believe. The reason we build homes with sweat equity and financial equity in Govans and Sandtown is because we know we've been forgiven. The reason we find ways to support families who flee from places that are not safe to be called home is because we know we have been forgiven. The reason this church has taken its treasure and lent out more than $25,000 in microloans, most of which has been paid back, to people who are trying to make good for themselves and in their communities is because we know we have been forgiven. We have experienced amazing grace and have blessings we could never be fully accountable for. Children's Chapel, youth group, a pilgrimage, yoga, sacred sound, crystal bowls, every single thing we do is an invitation to all of us to participate and invite others to help the love of God take root. It's why we don't just say all are welcome, but so many of you work so hard for this morning where we literally welcome people through a party in our neighborhood. I don't know every individual area of your life where you are desperately asking for God's help right now, but I know that it's there. I don't know the position you take on every conflict and debate in our country right now, but I know we all don't agree on everything. But I do know what Paul said. Don't worry about the quarreling. Don't worry about the opinions, because I know one thing we believe together that matters, and which is why we are here. We come together to hear stories of God never giving up on God's people. We come together to open our hands and take bread and be at an altar to hear God say, I love you, I accept you, you fully belong as exactly who you are. We hear words of absolution and forgiveness to be reminded that we're doing the best we can with the tools we have, and we're just going to keep trying to make it work. Because we believe deep down that God intends us to be a certain way, and God intends us to show something to the world that is of God. And we trust that the transformation that happens when we hear stories of courage, strength, and hope will help the hurt in our hearts, will help heal the divisions between us, and help us focus on teaching reconciliation through the ministries and offerings and being together in this place. So when I listen to hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people, I hear it together with all of you and all of what we do. And I hear the still, small voice saying, just practice, practice, practice. Because amazing grace abounds, and you and I together make it tangible and real. Amen.